Hey, hi everybody. My name's Alexandria. I'm a CSM here at CoreView. Thanks for coming to the first CoreView Customer Engineering Workshop. Today's topic specifically is custom actions and global filters, and Sumo's going to go through that with everyone. Just so you know, this is being recorded. We're going to put it in our customers only webinar section on the support page. So if you ever want to refer back to it, or if somebody on your team wasn't able to attend, they'll be able to look at the video there. But other than that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it straight over to Sumo.
Thanks, Alexandria. As Alexandria mentioned, my name is Sumo Adequavio. I'm a professional services consultant here at CoreView. And today's workshop is essentially going to go over two features within CoreView that you may or may not know, and that could enhance your usage, help with some work, some use cases, and really expand on the platform. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the global filter. Bear with me just one moment as I share out my screen. And give this just a moment to refresh for everybody. But as you can see, this is the CoreView tenant. And within CoreView, we have our main filter icon here, which if you've ever used any of our vTenants or permissions, as well as license pools, you may have used this filter to toggle between those. The global filter is at the very top. And what the global filter allows us to do is essentially set up, depending on your use case, you can create lists of your user environment and then create views based off whatever specific criteria you may have. So in this example, we're going to be using an exclusion list. So you want to ensure that when you log into CoreView and you select exclusion list, these set users, now they could be individuals that are on litigation hold, that are on temporary leave, various criteria, but you can create this master list and then filter out those individuals that you don't want to be managed or even reported on. To get into the global filter, as I mentioned before, you're going to click on this icon, excuse me, and right here underneath global filter, you can select manage. It's going to take you to our global filters management page. From there, you can click add new, manage, and then add new, excuse me. And you're going to come up to our typical data entry screen. Here, you can provide the name as well as the description of the global filter. Selected, if you have this check marked, whenever you save this global filter, it's going to enable it into your view. By deselecting it, it's not going to impact your view, and you can continue moving on. Shared is going to provide the view to other operators within CoreView. So if you don't want individuals having to reinvent the wheel, you can simply create your view, share it, and other operators can then select it from their menu. The filters tab is as you get your list imported in, and I'll step you through that as well. You can layer in additional filters on that list so that, as the example being an exclusion list, we can import in all of our users and then create a filter here to say, I don't want a sales department to be included. And as we go through this, you'll see as this comes together and the end result, it's fairly straightforward.
I'm gonna pause right there. Sorry, we've got a question from Erica.
Hi, Sam. Real quick question. You showed how you can save the filters either for a personal view later or for a shared view. Where do you go to pull those back if you want to? If you want to open them up later,
you would click on manage, and once you have one created, this manage screen will show you those results, and then you can see if you have it selected or if it's shared.
Appreciate that.
No problem. So I will quickly create this exclusion list global filter. On the import CSV tab, it's your typical import. As you click here, you'll be provided with the selection. Now, one thing I want to make note of is the import CSV the formatting of the CSV should not have any headers, and it should be comprised of user principal names. This allows CoreView within that view to then look at that UPN value and all the subsequent attributes that you'll be able to filter later. So you just don't want to try to upload a CSV that has all of that detail. We simply need a header-free UPN CSV. As you can see here, I've selected that exclusion list CSV, and all this is in my demo tenant, excuse me, is a list of all the users. Since I'm wanting to filter out users, I want to have all of my user community accounted for at first, and then I can layer in any of the filtering to remove them. If this was a running cadence that I had where I was getting the CSV provided to me, I would simply come in here, re-upload that CSV to provide the new details to account for any new user accounts, but all of the filters that you previously create still stay in place. So here through selecting, if you wanted to deselect any of the users that you've imported in, you could. The verified all is simply, it's reconciling against the tenant. What you can do in these instances is simply choose the add all, and it's going to take all of your entries, as you can see here, and show you what this view is built off of. Now, since this is an exclusion list and that we want to remove accounts, we now can jump back to the filter tab. And this is where you can layer in any number of filters based off any number of criteria. So as I click on the plus, I can now go through and select through a list of all of the Active Directory attributes associated with user accounts. Now, we don't have, from a click standpoint, a list to display to you. However, as you begin to type what that field could potentially be, we do pre-populate that with a backend query. So as I'm looking for, I want to exclude the sales department, I would simply type department for the first few characters. Does not equal. Now the value is going to also do that query against your tenant, against any of the departments that are filled out, and it sees that I have two. So I'm choosing my sales department. And what this is saying is, of this imported list of users, I want this view to be all of those users whose department does not equal sales. As I click on the blue check and then continue, it will take us back to this the global filter screen, excuse me, where you can then see again any of the global filters that you have created, as well as what their statuses are. So at this point, since I did have it selected and I click here, we can see that I have the exclusion list selected. When I now go to run my typical report and jump right into the user report, I can scroll here to my department field. I'll choose is not empty. But as we go through this list, you can see there is no sales designation and there's only 19 results.
You know, I'm going to pause again. We've got a question from Jocelyn.
Sure.
So we are a hybrid organization, so our users are brought over from an Active Directory sync.
Mhm.
And I would want to, sometimes templates are added and they're added as users. So would I have to know that a user has been added, and every time I do an exclusion link or an exclusion, I would have to re-import? I guess a simpler question is, would I have to re-import for every day or every time I ran this report to make sure that all my users are accounted for?
It really is going to be with your approach. Now, in this demo, I've just opted to grab a full dump of my users. What may work in your environment would be the opposite, where you build that CSV off of the exclusions themselves, and then you don't have to necessarily set up a filter. You can, instead of managing or having to daily or whatever the cadence may be, instead of having to pull in all of your users, you would be working off of the users you want to exclude. So it'd be a little more manageable than a constant import, but there would still be that manual updating of the view.
So I have to upload something to apply a filter to it. I can't just say, like in your case, I just can't say do a filter for all users that are not in sales without uploading something first.
You can do that in the report itself. What the global filter is trying to provide is just a excuse me, a less clicks, less steps for the end user. So you can get to your end game as you described by simply going into the user report and then filtering off of those departments, but you don't get necessarily some of the versatility that the additional filtering the global filter will give you, but you could manage it that way as well.
Thank you.
But as here in the demo itself, as you can see, we have all of the departments that are reporting back from an Azure AD Active Directory standpoint. And when I remove this global filter, and reapply that same criteria of just show me all of my departments. We now have sales showing. So in a more real world example, if you had a legal hold or a temporary leave, you could create a view of temporary leave, have that CSV of all of those individuals that are on leave, and then use the global filter to filter them out of all of your day-to-day tasks, whether it be reports, management, auditing, whatever that may be. Within all of the reports, excuse me, within all of the reports, I don't want to present this in a way to make you feel as though you have to create a view to get to that end result. If you go to your user report, all of the criteria that we are kind of getting a head start with using the global filter is still available to you here. So if you wanted to run those reports on specific departments, you can still filter within there.
We've got a question from Erica.
Go ahead, Erica.
Boy, you're going to be sorry I came to this meeting.
Not at all.
A quick question I have is, the previous question was definitely on point, because one of the things that would be a concern to me is similar to hers, which is that in a dynamic environment like Active Directory or even Azure, obviously, your users are constantly changing, as well as the group. So even if you used a filter like sales, you're still going to have changes potentially. So what would be the use case scenario where you would use like a static CSV file instead of, you keep mentioning that you can just get the same thing with the user report, which is, I mean, that's where I live, is in the user report, because I know it's it's essentially real-time info.
Well, the biggest use case that I've seen for the exclusion lists have primarily been around legal hold. Some of the report use cases, they don't want to have any of those individuals included from a licensing consumption standpoint, from a usage, regardless if they have a license or not. Primarily simply because of the regulatory stance or positioning, the posture that they may be having, and whatever they're trying to abide by from that standpoint. With those types of exclusion lists, they have their internal process allowed for HR would provide them that CSV. And it was the same CSV that would be updated as more legal holds were put on. And they were simply uploading that CSV into their exclusion list. And then they would set their filter and go on their business.
And the
primarily because I'm sorry?
And the point of that was to do what exactly?
That was, they had an internal need that they were having their numbers skewed by individuals that were inactive, but they were still full-time employees because they were on hold, or they had left the company and hadn't hit that 7-year window. And so they would show up in I thought that account was disabled, or I thought that account was on hold. When it ultimately became, yeah, that account's on hold, it shouldn't have really been in this view or in this report. Let me clear that, regenerate it, and go. They had so many instances of that that they decided, hey, is there any kind of exclusion list that we can create and share so that our operators know when they come in, select exclusion list, and they don't have to worry about any of the legal hold users populating any of their reports.
Thank you.
No problem. So in a nutshell, that is really what the global filter is trying to accommodate. Now, your use cases and mileage may vary, but at that very top level example, if you do have scenarios where you can facilitate a running list and you can go through that cadence of uploading, it really does give you some flexibility in terms of ensuring the data that you are reporting on is indeed what you want, as well as eliminating a lot of the custom reports or saved reports that are shared, the congestion between operators. You can condense some of that through the view and then run your reports. So it's really going to be dependent on your use case, but I feel like it's a very, very useful part of the CoreView platform. Next are the custom actions. And custom actions are admittedly, and I want to preface this with custom actions are PowerShell. They allow you and they enhance your capabilities within the CoreView platform to execute PowerShell scripts and fill any native gaps that you may have or any specific custom gap that you may have. An example being if you have a target SMTP address or a secondary SMTP address that you need to add when you're onboarding a user, custom actions can step in for that. If you wanted to remove the user profile picture that a user uploaded in Office 365, you could use a custom action for that. And so in this next demonstration, it's really going to be around that first example, adding a secondary SMTP address and how those custom actions are really built and some of the concepts behind them. So to get to custom actions in CoreView, if you're familiar, as you should be, we have our Analyze tab and our Manage tab. Manage is where you're going to be able to access any of the change capability of CoreView, with custom actions being PowerShell executions against objects in a modification stance. It falls under that change action. To create a custom action, as you see on the left-hand side, you want to select the Manage Custom Actions on the left, and you'll be presented with a very similar window as you saw with the global filter. To create a custom action, it's simply clicking on Manage and Create. And you're going to be presented again with a screen to fill out any of the pertinent information that you want, as well as the specifics that CoreView needs in order to execute this. So for this example, again, it's a secondary SMTP, so we'll call this add SMTP address. And then from here, we'll go through the tabs. For target, our target tab, this is important as it relates to virtual tenants. The target tells the virtual tenant how to filter and what the fencing or guidelines are around that. So is it user? Is it mailbox? What accesses should this have? So that if you have a virtual tenant that is restrained by domain and you don't want a department that you have delegated that access out to be able to change another department's access. You'll want to set this here. Otherwise, the custom action has the potential to run against the entire tenant. When you select your target here, CoreView can enforce the virtual tenant that keeps that fencing in place, and it will only execute it on the objects that are within that virtual tenant. So with this being a secondary SMTP address, it would go in the user bucket. Because, and the reason being is tied directly to the PowerShell. So depending on the PowerShell commandlet, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds with this, but depending on the PowerShell is really going to determine which target you select. So for this PowerShell, yes.
I guess got a quick mention here.
Yeah.
So if you could click on that drop down list again, because it didn't refresh on the screen quick enough to actually see what was in there. I submitted a user voice request for, and I'm still not seeing that drop down, to add device to this target dropdowns so that we could put devices into vTenants. So if anybody on this call would like to go to user voice and then up my vote for adding the, and assume I don't think we can see that drop down. I don't know, maybe you're presenting something like the window versus the screen. But the devices category is actually missing from here. And it would be great if we could get that functionality added, because we have, I'm sure like most folks, delegated devices and device groups, and this would be the only way we could do that through CoreView.
No, that's a great call out, because I think that definitely the device would absolutely be useful, particularly with the use cases. These were primarily selected, and I'll go through, since the list, I am sharing my entire window, but for that drop down to not show, just so you know, we are going through distribution groups, mailbox, mail contacts, O365 groups, security groups, teams, and user. So this again allows that filter and device. If you can go to that user voice, I would love to see that be added as well, or at least some input, because that is absolutely looked at from our development and product teams. And so your input is what helps shape this product. But again, for this example, we're doing users, because I know that for my example, with what I'm needing to run, I'm running that against a user. The command needs the identity, and the identity typically falls in the DN or UPN, as well as the display name. When I select this target, CoreView will then show you, okay, these are the targets that you're telling me you want this to run against. You can use this as a simple confirmation. And since I've selected user and I see my user objects are returning, I can go to my next tab, which is inputs. Because we selected user from the target, one of the inputs by default is going to be UPN. The way that is tied specifically again to the PowerShell. So if you do have PowerShell that isn't bound to any of those specific targets, we do have a none option that frees you from having to default to one of these specified input values. But again, since I know this is running against the user principal name, this is exactly what I would want. And now we get to the script tab, and this is the meat of the custom action. This is what we're telling CoreView, I want you to run this. And typically it's no different than what you would run from your PowerShell command or PowerShell session on your laptop, connected into 365. So if you bear with me, I'll grab my snippet of code and I can show you how we format this so that it can be executed. So as you can see here, I have my set mailbox command, and I've already set my variable of user principal name. Now that's based again off of the target and the input, but this is telling again where you would typically run this and enter in the individual's UPN. We're setting that to a variable. The switch for email address for the set mailbox is being executed, and then we're using the proper syntax for adding a new email address, but we're setting that as a variable as well. So for this one custom action, we have two variables or two bits of data that need to be provided in order for it to run. You have the generated script, gives you just the confirmation to show you any of your variables or switches, any of the confirms that you've disabled, because we don't support interactive PowerShell within our custom actions currently. But this gives you, again, just that confirmation where I can see, okay, yes, this set mailbox command is going to run against the user principal name, and it's going to attempt to add a new SMTP address. With all
Where,
those,
where are you getting your new SMTP address when it's not a parameter being passed in?
I'm providing that. So the instance, the idea being service desk or help desk receives a request for Joe to get a new email address. This custom action would allow them to run this against Joe and then enter in what that new email address should be
So it's going to prompt you.
It is not going to prompt you.
So where is the script going to get that value that's your variable called new SMTP address?
We will set that here.
Oh, so you hadn't gotten to that.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, Doug. We hadn't gotten there.
Okay. You were going through left to right, so I was wondering if we skipped over that step.
Apologies. Yes, absolutely. I wanted to keep the left to right, and then when we get here, add that next variable to demonstrate that.
Yep.
But that is the other key component, is all of the inputs are what's going to drive that. So you've got to have your inputs set in order to know for the custom action to prompt you for that data. Otherwise, if it's not a requirement, it's still going to run but fail, obviously. We jump back here and I'll add that string value, no different than what we have here for user principal name. And we just set to that same value that was in the script previously. And then obviously this is whatever you want set or whatever your criteria is. We can see here that the parameters are showing we have the user principal name and the new SMTP address. So we are, for all intents and purposes, good to go. At this point, we can save and submit. Now, in this workshop, I have elevated permissions, so I'll be able to go through the approval process on my own. But when you submit in your environment any custom actions, there is a review process internal to CoreView, where someone from product will be looking at the structure, the syntax of the custom action, just to ensure there's nothing more widespread that could potentially happen. And then it goes through the approval. Most turnarounds are within 24 hours, but we typically have sooner. So I will submit. And we'll publish. So at this point, to test this and to demonstrate this, we have our add SMTP address custom action created. So now it's simply just grabbing a user. So I'll hop over to my 365 demo tenant here. And Adele is a good first user to grab. Simply by running, again, because we set the target to user, we don't need to provide the user. We're going to be presented a screen to select from the user pool. The only thing we'll need to provide is that secondary SMTP address. So when I click run here, we're taken to that user selection screen. I choose Adele. And then here is that, well, what is this additional SMTP address going to be? Now, just to show there are no additional SMTP addresses currently on that account, no aliases. And we will add myself. We simply just wait here for the confirmation. Clicking in will give you the more detail. And by clicking in, we've already got the completion. It was successful. And we can see the parameters that were provided. Now going back to the 365 and refreshing, we should see that additional address. So with custom actions, there is a lot of power, and it's really bound by just the extent of how deep you want to go with your PowerShell scripts. Doug, as you know, and with what you've seen, there is capability and there is depth, quite frankly, where you can have a one-line PowerShell, as we've demonstrated here, or you can have a fairly complex, layered, piped script that, as long as you've set your inputs and have your variables correct, there's no reason why that shouldn't be able to run as a custom action and be delegated and be automated if you choose to do so. Were there any questions? Well, outside of that, that is truly what we have in terms of the content for custom actions, as well as the global filter. I'd love to open up any questions or discussion at this time. Otherwise, I will pass back to Alexandria.
I was going to suggest as well, if anybody has an example they would maybe like Sumo to walk through right now to help them with something around the custom actions or global filter, we have time for that. Go for it, Erica.
Going back to your use case scenario for legal matters, I have a lot of work I do on legal hold, and I do use CoreView for managing those users. Based upon the use case scenario described, I was really confused by what they were trying to do. It didn't make any sense to me. It was kind of weird. I mean, as far as the licensing goes, based upon my understanding of how you can use e-discovery in core e-discovery for Microsoft, licensing shouldn't really be an issue. So do you know what they were trying to accomplish and what value they were getting out of this report?
They were simply trying to reduce the noise of their reports. It had been such a headache in various facets, whether it was archive size, trying to get information in detail on their usage within the environment, seeing these users that were on hold and they were already accounted for and shouldn't be calculated. It was just throwing that internal process off.
So right there, when you say they shouldn't be calculated, it sounded like you were talking about they shouldn't be calculating their licenses, but if they're an active user and they're working in Office 365, they need a license. If they're not an active user and they're on hold, I'm trying to figure out why they've licensed them.
Well, they have them licensed because they were still they were inactive, but they were still full-time employees. They were on hold, and the data was already either in a case that was searchable, and they were simply keeping that data for that regulatory obligation.
Yeah,
They were encountering.
That's why I'm struggling, because to me that makes zero sense, because with with even the basic E3 license, the discovery tools allow you to preserve the data without needing a license. So,
But the driver wasn't the hold aspect of it. The driver was their status as being on hold. And when looking at a service usage report, having people that were on hold that they didn't want included in a service usage report from an inactive active status, it was throwing off that report specifically, because they would come back inactive, but that inactivity was accounted for because they were either on leave or that account's on hold and the user isn't present in the environment. So
the
it wasn't,
the
I'm
leave
sorry?
makes more sense. The leave makes more sense to me because they're ultimately planning on coming back, and they're, the question is, how long are they going to be away, and do you want to pay for that license? In most cases, Microsoft makes it that you are going to pay for that license, so they're going to come back. So that I get, but when the people are on hold, their hold status, to me, I'm just trying to understand, because, but that's okay. I mean, that's probably a question better left to the customer in that case. I was just trying to see how I could adapt whatever they were doing for my area, because of my hold needs, which are unfortunately representing the state government. It's not insignificant. 40% of
but-
our users are 40% of our users are on hold.
And within your environment, you're still accounting for those holds. You're still running your reports from a service usage. It doesn't have any impact on your service usage because you don't have any kind of tiered user system or structure, which is what this specific customer had. Now, it was outside of government. It was around healthcare. And so there was a HIPAA layer, but I didn't have any real basis of the information outside of Sumo. We don't want these people on hold to appear. We don't want these people that are on leave to appear. And when we run this service usage report, and it gives me a 90-day total of this is the waste. And for your example, Erica, 40% of these users in this report shouldn't even be in this report. As far as we're concerned, that was the driver. It's just to clear some of the noise out.
Yeah, maybe
So for
it's
your
because,
use,
and maybe it's because I'm relatively new to CoreView. I'm just trying to figure out why I wouldn't, how that information is noise, is from my perspective, because from a licensing perspective, I don't see an impact. And so, and that's my bread and butter licensing. So thank you.
absolutely, but and thank you, because it's one of those things that regarding specifically the usage, when they're on hold, there isn't any usage, and so that inactivity could throw off a report if you're just looking at straight usage and utilization. You, however, are going to be looking at all of your users, and you're not going to have any of that delineation to say, hey, this individual's on hold. I don't want to. Of course, you're going to want to have that information. But for whatever reason, these individuals in this hold, they did not want those in any of their reports, and they wanted to. It was slowing down whatever internal process they were having because they couldn't. They felt like they couldn't use CoreView because they were spending so much time having to reformat every report that they ran every time.
Got it. Thanks.
I think the better way, instead of focusing so much on how that customer used it, I think the takeaway that you want to have is there's a way to eliminate users through a list that would normally have showed up on the report for whatever reason.
Absolutely. For whatever reason,
I think you're just tying it too tightly to a use case that you're familiar with that has nothing to do with it because you don't understand what that customer's particulars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and because they're touching on a subject that's near and dear to my heart, I
Yeah.
was really curious. Although I
Exactly.
still don't understand why I wouldn't just use the darn user reports and put in place filters there rather than run a CSV file that's static. But
well, the report won't stick, and you would then have to save the report. And then when you save the report, you need to share the report. And then once it's shared, you have all of your operators that have that shared that are accessing it. And so there's that additional layer of delegation control that you get when you go through the saving, managing, because that's all something that is controllable in CoreView, where if the real crux of what you're trying to get to is just filtering out or filtering specifically to, you don't need to go through those steps of creating all of that when you can just create that view and then provide that view to the operators that then can create their reports and save them and do what they need to by having that data already pre-filtered, for lack of a better term.
you're saying it's an easier way to do delegation.
No, it's a easier way to provide a view to your delegated operators that they then don't have to have additional layers of steps of clearing out. You can already do a base layer of clearing.
No, I get it. Yeah, thank you.
So Chris Miller had a question. I just want to make sure that that question was answered before we move on to the next person.
I think it was partially answered, but couldn't you also set up filters on your vTenant at the level if you wanted to filter out legal hold mailboxes from there so they don't show up at all?
That was my question too, is like, why would you need a global filter when you have vTenant filters, unless there's some other use case?
That is really around the customers that don't have vTenants and aren't using vTenants. They still have the global filter capability to allow them that filtering capability. But you're absolutely right. You do have that additional filtering where if you wanted to go into the user filter of your vTenant and configure the same type of filter, you absolutely can. It's more just multiple ways to skin that one cat. Because we do have some customers that aren't leveraging vTenants currently.
That sound like us that have 30 plus.
And then we have some that have 30 plus, 50 plus, 70 plus.
Jacqueline has another question.
Go ahead, Jesselyn.
Yes. So we do not use vTenants because of the way our company is structured. There's no real way to get them get people in them. And I was on the global filter. I love the idea because right now on our saved reports, we have practically a full page of saved reports because we always look at data a certain way. And so I want to go back to the requirement for a CSV file because I would like to be able to, for some of our less knowledgeable CoreView users, I'd like to bring over some people from, let's say, first level support who, you know, would frankly do a lot of fumbling if they had to, you know, do reports. So there is no, I just want to make sure I have it right. There is no way to get around having to import the CSV file.
Correct.
Okay. I'll be putting in a user voice on that one.
Please do. But yes, currently actually, let me just double check one thing. So I believe we are locked. Yeah, so I'm locked, unfortunately, a user voice because we are locked to that import CSV. We need to import some data in order to create the view.
Yeah, it looks to me like if you just added the same functionality as you have with custom actions, where you have a, I forget what it was called, where you have the boundaries, where it's users, groups, whatever, that would work very well here.
That is a great suggestion, and I hate to sound like that guy, but a user voice would be terrific because we could get some visibility there as well as point, because yeah, that would add just that additional layer to where you wouldn't necessarily need that import at all. You could just select.
I'm writing it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If any come up, you guys have your CSMs, please reach out to me or your specific CSM to discuss those questions. Our next topic, which will be in May, and hopefully your CSM has sent it out. If not, nudge them and they will definitely forward the invite to you. But Siam will be the presenter for that, and it'll be on group licensing with CoreView. So we hope to see you guys there. And as well, if you have additional topics you'd like to hear in more about in these monthly workshops, let your CSM know. We're keeping a list. We want to hear what you guys would find interesting, and we'll definitely try to get to all of them. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.